Imagine being dropped alone in the middle of a dense, inhospitable forest, in a harsh climate, full of venomous animals, with no food, and with the only mission of trying to survive. That was the reality that many castaways and exiles in Brazil had to face in the 1500s. But what was the fate of these men? How did they live? Were they able to integrate into any local society? And which examples of castaways and exiles changed the history of Brazil and Spanish America forever? In today's video, we're going to talk about the little-known stories of castaways and exiles and how they were essential in the process of colonizing the Americas. But before we start the video, if you enjoy our content, become a member of our channel right now. That way you'll have access to our group and exclusive content, including live classes. To delve even deeper into the behind the scenes of history, one of the worst punishments for a convict was the penalty of exile. Exile consisted of being forcibly sent to a prison, a fortress that needed protection, or a place where just being there meant constant danger. Thus, one of the best destinations chosen by the King of Portugal for the application of exile was the coast of Brazil. The exiled person was usually abandoned with little or no supplies in a hostile place to try to survive for a set period of time, usually months or years. And if he managed to survive, the ship would later come along the coast to rescue him, but the chances of survival were always very small. The exiled person was exposed to wild animals, a different climate, and hostile tribes, as well as having to feed himself alone in a completely new environment without any help. And both the Portuguese and the Spanish were well aware of the risks of leaving a man alone in the forest, with possibly hostile tribes. Cristóbal Colombo himself left his crew behind at Fort La Navidad, and when he returned, he found them completely wiped out by the natives. Thus, being devoured or simply murdered by the natives was a real and likely risk for any exile. Even some donatarios of Brazil, like Antonio Cardoso de Barros and the first bishop of Brazil, Bishop Sardinha, were devoured by the Quete Indians. After shipwrecking near the coast, another donatario, Francisco Pereira Coutinho, after running aground on a sandbank and reaching the shore, was also sacrificed and devoured in a ritual of anthropophagy. But some managed to survive and made history. One of the first exiles cast ashore in Brazil was mentioned in the letters of Pero Vaz de Caminha. His name was Afonso Ribeiro, and he had been accused of homicide and abandoned by Pedro Álvares Cabral on the coast of Brazil. The accounts say that he fell into utter despair when he saw the fleet leaving and tried to swim after it, without success. And the natives, feeling sorry for him, took him in, and he lived among them for 20 months until he was finally rescued, when another expedition passing along the coast, probably led by Gonzalo Coelho, rescued him. And Afonso, having contact with the other Portuguese, gave valuable information about the way of life and customs of the natives of Brazil. This highly valuable information would lead to either a royal pardon or even a monetary reward. And in Spanish America in turn, the experience with castaways was extremely useful. When Hernán Cortés lands in Veracruz, searching for the lost Grijalva expedition, he finds 2 survivors and a wreck of a Spanish ship on sandbanks. Out of 12 survivors, 4 were sacrificed to the gods by the Zontal Maya, which included the leader of the expedition, Valdivia. Others died from diseases, and the 2 women who were part of the expedition died from overwork as slaves to the natives. And so only 2 survived. One of them was Geronimo de Aguilar, a Franciscan friar who would help Hernán Cortés by translating the language of the Maya Zontal into Castilian and then into Nahuatl with the help of the Indian woman Malinche. The other one, in turn, was named Gonzalo Guerrero, and unlike Aguilar, he completely assimilated into the Maya Zontal, started a family, and decided to stay with the natives. Against the Spanish, Guerrero became one of the greatest military leaders among the Maya Zontal, and he was widely pursued by Hernán Cortés and other Spaniards. They tried to convince him to leave the Maya and join them in the conquest of Tenochtitlan, but he remained firm in staying with the Maya, claiming he had a family and 3 children to raise with the native woman. He even later trained the Maya to defend themselves against Spanish conquest expeditions, including some led by Hernán Cortés. He would be the only Spaniard to collaborate with the natives against the conquistadors during Juan Díaz de Solís's expedition. When trying to found the city of Buenos Aires in 1521, all the Spaniards ended up being killed and eaten by the local natives. But one child, a young Spanish cabin boy named Francisco del Puerto, was spared by the natives and integrated into their society, living among them for almost 10 years. And after that, he is said to have devised defense plans against the Spanish and even deceived and betrayed the Spanish in other Castilian attempts to occupy the Rio de la Plata region. As researcher Maria Laura Graz points out in her article, the figure of Francisco del Puerto took on many shapes and versions, with some saying that he returned to Spain to betray the Spanish in another expedition, and others that he always continued living among the natives. But what is known is that he, being welcomed by the natives, played an important role in the fight against the Spanish. But not everyone was lucky enough to be well received among the Indians. One example is Juan Ortiz, a Spanish doctor and soldier who ended up enslaved by the Native Americans. Still on a coastal expedition in the United States searching for a lost team, they were lured by the Indians, who claimed to have messages from the missing crew members. But when they got close to the coast, everyone in the expedition was attacked and killed. Ortiz, managing to survive, was taken to the city of Ucita to be sacrificed to the gods. However, his life was spared after the chief's wife and daughters pleaded for him, claiming that he did not pose a threat. And after the chief spared him, he was able to do many favors for the tribe, living among them for more than 10 years. However, when the tribe was overpowered by another group, he was chosen to be sacrificed again. And that's when he was guided by the daughter of Chief Ucita to escape from his sentence. In this way, Ortiz starts living with some other fugitive natives. But luckily for him, the Spanish had just landed in Florida with Hernando de Soto's expedition, and the conquistador hears about a Spaniard who was living as a refugee among the natives. And when the Spanish attack the camp where he was, he immediately shouts the word Seville over and over, making the Spanish recognize the name of the city and stop the attack. Ortiz thus joined Soto's expedition and would die 3 years later when the expedition was camping in Arkansas. But the place where the shipwrecked castaways were essential for the success of the occupation was, without a doubt, in Brazil. In Brazil, a castaway named Caramuru was essential for the contact between the Portuguese and the local indigenous people. By marrying the indigenous woman named Paraguaçu, he assisted the king himself, Dom João III, in establishing the general government, and also helped the grantee Francisco Pereira Coutinho. If the Portuguese managed to settle in Bahia, it was thanks to the mediation of this important castaway. In Pernambuco, another captaincy that prospered, a Portuguese man named Geronimo de Albuquerque was captured by the Tavahara indigenous people. However, the Portuguese man, on the verge of being killed, was saved by the chief's daughter, who fell in love with him. By marrying her, he had a large number of descendants, thus helping to pacify the captaincy of Pernambuco. But one of the best examples of how Exile was put to good use was, without a doubt, with João Ramalho in the captaincy of São Vicente. When Martim Afonso de Souza landed on the coast of São Paulo, he discovered that there was a Portuguese man living among the Indians for more than a decade. And João, together with Antonio Rodrigues, were very well integrated into Tupiniquim society, with Ramalho married to India Bartira, daughter of Chief Tibiriça, while Antonio was married to the daughter of Chief Picarobi. and Ramalho would be one of those responsible for integrating the Portuguese with the Tupiniquim natives, turning them into allies. And what's interesting is that these castaways were a mix of both cultures. For example, Jorge Caldera in his book points out that Juan Ramalho founded a city, was elected councilman in that city, and walked around naked, up and down. With his 30 indigenous wives by his side, he helped establish a slave port and lay the foundations of the captaincy, which he helped to prosper. In the same way, it was the mysterious bachelor of Cananea, who was an exile, who also helped Martim Afonso de Souza in establishing his captaincy and in making contact with other natives of the Cananea region. In other words, if Martim Afonso was able to make São Vicente prosper for good, it was because of the exiles in Vicentine lands, who greatly helped in making contact with those tribes. So we see that shipwreck survivors and exiles played a very important role in the success and failure of the expeditions to the Americas by Portugal and Spain. Men who were left to their own fate, but who managed, through great hardship, to adapt and survive in whatever way they could. But they never imagined that their actions would shape the occupation of an entire continent and also change the course of history. And did you know about the role of castaways and exiles in the Portuguese and Spanish colonization? What surprised you the most? So, leave your comment now to support our work and take the opportunity to become a member of the channel right now. That way, you'll be able to dive deeper and learn even more about the fascinating Iberian history.